Madam President.
Senator from Georgia.
I thank the senator from Oklahoma for yielding, and I will be brief, but I spend a lot of time, as all of us do, listening to the speeches of our colleagues and spend a lot of time thinking about what they say, and I was compelled to come to the floor as I heard the opening remarks by the senator from Oklahoma to tell a little story. Talking about grandchildren, my wife and I are blessed. We have 9 of them. This past Tuesday, the 15th of June, was our 42nd anniversary. Really, the rest of my life's about those grandchildren, to whatever extent I can do it, either as a grandfather or a legislator, trying to make sure that we leave them a life that at least has the hope of opportunity, as great as was left to all of us by the generations that preceded us. A few weeks ago in Albany, Georgia, actually a few months ago, I was making a speech, as all of us do, and used a trillion as easily as all of us do in our speeches. And after my speech, I opened the floor for questions. The gentleman at the back of the room says, "I just can't quite get my hands on how much a trillion really is. Can you explain it?" And I was up there doing the best I could, and I got the number of zeros past 1 billion and all that, but you really couldn't quantify it to magnify the gravity of what that number means. So when I got home that night, my wife of 42 years suggested that, well, why don't you just figure out how many years have to go by for 1 trillion seconds to pass? And I said, you know, that's a good idea. Everybody would understand that. So I got the calculator out and multiplied 60 seconds times 60 times 60 to get how many seconds in an hour, 3,600. Multiplied that times 24 to get how many seconds in a day. Multiplied that times 365 to get how many seconds in a year. And then I divided that into 1 trillion. The answer is 31,709 years for 1 trillion seconds to go by. Thursday, 2 weeks ago, our debt went above $13 trillion. So you can take that and multiply 13 times 31,709 and see how big that obligation is. And if you spread it over a lot of people, you can reduce the number down to an amount that doesn't seem as big. But we are one country. It is our debt. And to pay it off, we do either one of 3 things. We inflate the dollar to a value that's so cheap what everybody has is worthless, and you pay off a debt with cheap dollars, but you destroy your country. Or you can just look the other way and say, well, maybe nobody else will care. Maybe they'll still buy our debt. We're going to keep spending, which is kind of what appears to be happening now. Or you can do what American families have been doing all their lives, but in particular the last 18 to 24 months. You sit around the kitchen table. In this case, we sit around the conference table. And you start setting your priorities to live within your means. And I would just want to commend the senator from Oklahoma, because his examples about accountability for expenditures, doing away with redundancy and all those things, yeah, that's hard to do, and yes, it's tedious to do, and yes, it's more fun to talk about other things, but that's what Americans are having to do, and they're having to do it big time right now. So I just couldn't help but come to the floor, having just celebrated my 42nd anniversary. Well, I didn't get to celebrate it because I was here and she was in Marietta, but we're going to celebrate it this weekend. And thinking about my 9 grandchildren and thinking about the challenges of the debt that's rising and the increase that's just in this bill alone, as well as some of the pay-fors in this bill, which actually are going to stunt growth even worse, like carried interest. And I thought I'd just come and commend the senator from Oklahoma on being right on point. We all might have different opinions of what ought to be cut and what ought to be moved and what ought to be removed from being redundant, but we ought to be at the table figuring out what those should be, making agreements we can live with, and making the future for our grandchildren at least as bright, as prosperous, and as free as the one our parents left to us. And I yield back to the senator for Oklahoma.
Madam President.
Senator